Hello, and welcome to another segment of Latin American Revolutionaries. My name is Morgan Parker, and I'll be taking us on a trip through time to learn about a very interesting man named Augusto Sandino. Sandino, who was nicknamed Bandit by the U.S. government, was a Nicaraguan revolutionary who led a rebellion between 1927 and 1933, and who is also seen as a symbol of resistance to U.S. domination throughout Latin America. In this segment, as we do with all of them, we'll not only look at the revolutionary himself, but we'll also incorporate a few texts that helped lead me to find out who the man really was, the legacy he left behind, and also what led him to revolution. Let's get into it. The first book I explored was Sandino, the testimony of a Nicaraguan patriot from 1921 to 1934 by Sandino himself, but later translated by Robert E. Conrad and edited by Sergio Ramirez. This was one of the first books translated in English that shared the passionate words and views of Augusto Sandino. The book explains the fight between American Marines and Sandino's army and what led up to it. It helped to show the unexpected rise of Sandino from a farmer into the leader of a military threat against U.S. opposition that had been in Nicaragua since 1909. It also explains how Sandino motivated a new level of patriotic feelings in the people with his ideals concerning the oppressed and poor citizens of Nicaragua. It not only looked at Sandino's adventures, but also delved into the overlooked relationship between Nicaragua and the United States. When reading this, I was able to see that Sandino was ultimately fighting against U.S. imperialism, and that this would lead to his demise at the hands of United States-installed General Anastasio Somoza of the newly formed National Guard. While he was not completely successful in his revolution, his ideals and power did not fall him to the grave. His inspired followers, known as the Sandinistas, would eventually overthrow the Somozan reign and would continue to fight for Sandino's goals for Nicaragua for decades to come. The second book that I really used extensively was The Sandino Affair by Neil Macaulay. It gave a different feel than the testimony of a Nicaraguan patriot, mainly because it wasn't a first-hand account by the man that we're talking about, but Macaulay really dissects what was going on, not just in Nicaragua, but also around Nicaragua in Latin America, also dealing with United States interventions. But he also really focuses on Sandino and what made him the man that would lead revolutionaries to follow his beliefs and some of the actions that he did for years to come. What I also liked about this book is that Macaulay is not only a historian, but he was also a lieutenant in Fidel Castro's 26th of July movement army. He was able to give a first-hand knowledge on guerrilla tactics used, the politics behind rallying the poor and working class into revolt, and how these groups would band together in a fight against U.S. involvement in the government and politics of Nicaragua, as well as other Latin American countries. He explains the popularity of guerrilla warfare against the much better equipped and trained U.S. soldiers. These tactics would prove successful in many revolutions and were bothersome to the U.S. Macaulay helps his information by comparing Sandino with other revolutionaries such as Zapata. This helped him to explain the shared ideologies for reform and how much they both yearned to help the population they saw being oppressed. He also explains how their unwavering commitment to the cause and unwillingness to compromise would lead to their demise. He also does a great job showing how Sandino's legacy would live on well after him, just as the first book did. And as I've said, while both books are similar in many aspects, Macaulay does a better job in explaining the real situation with Sandino, in my opinion. Macaulay definitely has nothing but respect and admiration for Sandino, but he was able to look at different aspects of Sandino's revolution while also linking it to the more current revolutions of the time. Moving forward in our segment, we're going to move past the books because they wouldn't be relevant without our revolutionary. So let's take a little deeper look into who Augusto Sandino was. Sandino was born May 18, 1895 as an illegitimate child to a wealthy landowner and an indigenous servant. He would grow up angry with how his mother was treated, and he also would never be fully accepted throughout his childhood. Also during his teenage years, the United States had begun their intervention of occupying Nicaragua and other Latin American countries in the Banana Wars so that they would have complete dominance and that they could build a canal through Central America to connect the Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean in a quicker trade route. This U.S. imperialism really weighed heavily on Sandino throughout his teenage years and would continue to build up. Moving past Sandino's childhood, he would find himself in a little sticky situation in 1921 when he attempted to kill Dagoberto Rivas, who was the son of a pretty prominent conservative townsman, after apparently Rivas had made pretty insulting remarks towards Sandino's mother. This could be said to be foreshadowing Sandino and conservatives' relationship for what's about to come. But after this, he fled Nicaragua, went to Honduras, then Guatemala, and ended up in Mexico where he worked at Standard Oil. But what he also did in Mexico was find some revolutionary ideals and fall in love with an ideology called indigenismo. This really promoted the indigenous people of Latin America and promoted a sense of pride in it. From here, he would return to Nicaragua in 1926 and begin to work at the San Albano gold mine. This is where he really started his revolutionary planting of the seed, started enticing some of the gold mine workers into kind of believing there may need to be change. What also happened during his return, or close to it, was the beginning of the Constitutionalist War, which was between the Liberal Army and the newly implemented conservative president Adolfo Diaz, who was installed through a coup that had some United States ties and intervention in it. The leaders of the liberal movement was General Jose Moncada, who we'll definitely talk about later, and the exiled liberal president Juan Bautista Sacasa. Sacasa would return and name himself president of the constitutional government, and their actions, those two people's actions, really inspired Sandino, so he formed a militia of mainly gold miners and attacked a local conservative garrison. But without training and proper equipment, it failed. So he knew that to have future success, he had to get aid and help. So who better than Jose Moncada? Well, he met up with Jose Moncada and was turned away. He did not receive what he wanted because Moncada and Sacasa did not trust him at first, so he had to find his own luck, which he did. He found rifles from fleeing conservative troops and was able to arm his men a little better, have some successful fights, and other liberal generals really started to look at him as maybe he could be a great asset to us. So they finally granted him military commission and aid. So his next move was to go to the Segovia region, where he recruited local peasants to join his army and actually had a bunch of successful attacks on governmental troops. And then he played a vital role in the move on Managua, the capital, and this is where the rebellion really begins and the revolution really starts to hit its peak. But it was thwarted by the United States, big-bagged United States. They intervened and threatened military intervention if the Liberal Army did not back off of seizing Managua, which they were very close to. This made the Liberals agree to a ceasefire and made representatives from both warring sides sign the Espino Negro Accord, which made both warring sides disarm, allowed Diaz to finish his presidency, and it made them make a new national army and a national guard kind of sense. But this was all held together by the new intervention of U.S. Marines that were sent down there, which really perturbed Sandino. You're probably wondering how Sandino felt about the Espino Negro Accord, and it's simple. He said, "I'm not going to disarm, and my followers and I are going to go back to the Segovia region and plan our next move." But the nation continued to move on after this, and in 1928, Jose Moncada had won the presidency, and this ousted the conservatives that were backed by the United States, but the United States did abide by the honest election and respected it, and said that they were starting to take the military out of there. But this did not please Sandino, because he was going to keep fighting until every last member of the United States Armed Forces was out of his country. So he rallied the peasants behind him and really continued to fight, and he fought until 1933 when he finally won this battle, and the United States agreed to retract their forces and get them out of Nicaragua. And this was the height probably of Sandino's military strength. It may not be the biggest he ever had, but it was the strongest he had. But he finally agreed to disarm to the president that was elected in 1932, which was Sacasa, which is funny how it happens because that shows just how prominent and powerful these three were at this time. But his disarmament would not last long because of a rising force that the United States had actually left behind without probably knowing. This beast that was left behind was the newly formed National Guard that was led by Anastasio Somoza. This new National Guard was supposed to promote stability in the country and get it back to where they wanted it to be, but Somoza quickly showed that he had different ideas. He began to use his power for his own ideas and what he wanted. So this made Sandino say, I may not disarm, and Sacasa and him met up and talked about it because Sacasa didn't want any problems with this. So they had an agreement that they would limit Somoza's power through the National Guard tremendously. But as we've learned with any Latin American that's had power over the military, this encroached on what he wanted and threatened him. So on February 20th, as Sandino was returning from the meeting with Sacasa, the National Guard, under orders of Somoza, surrounded him and executed him and his men, and then raided the northern commune that was granted to Sandino and his men, and killed most of his men, their wives, and even the children. So this really subdued his revolution at this time, and Somoza would then take power over as dictator in 1937. Somoza would have karma catch up with him, though, as he was assassinated in 1956, but Nicaragua was stuck with 2 more generations of the Somoza family up until 1979. The revolution of Sandino may have been halted, but his seeds had been planted, as you can tell by the rise in the 1970s of the Sandinista National Liberation Front, or FSLN, which was just rising in popularity and growing in followers, which really tested the Somoza hegemony. They were founded on 3 beliefs, the 3 legs of the stool of revolutionary democracy, which was political democracy, participatory democracy, and economic equality, which had a communistic feel of spreading equalization of the wealth and had some Marxist ideals behind it. And when you look at the Sandinista party, you basically just have to kind of look at Sandino's mind. It maybe evolved a little bit, but they really used his Marxist beliefs, connection with anarchism, and beliefs on secular religious views when dealing with their politics. And when they were dealing with looking at the revolutions to justify some of their reasonings behind freeing politically oppressed, socially oppressed, and economically oppressed people, they used the Christian theology of liberation. But the main point is that to truly understand the Sandinistas and their rise to power and time in power, you have to really understand the U.S.-led counter-revolutionary force, as well as the terror war on the Sandinistas that really discredited them for them, even though they made huge social changes across Nicaragua for the poor and working class. So they may not get the credit they deserve, but they had a great role model, and I believe Sandino would have been very proud of the beliefs and goals that they reached, and I believe that he would have no problem with them. This concludes this segment of Latin American revolutionaries, and I know it's a lot to take in, but I hope you've learned a little bit of something. To conclude this, Sandino did get named a unanimous national hero by Congress in 2010, and his revolution can still be seen today. I hope that you will look at my works cited. As you can tell through this presentation that I'm not very technologically advanced or savvy, and there were some technological issues elsewhere, so I will be adding my PowerPoint and all the references I used with this presentation. But again, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.